Hello and welcome to Learning Access 2013. My name is Mike Henry and this is the second video from Tutorial 2. In this video we're going to be talking about naming conventions. We're going to look at how to name objects, how to name fields. More importantly, we're going to talk about why we do it, how Access doesn't require it, but how it's really important for us as good database designers to follow these naming conventions. We're going to talk about naming conventions. And a lot of people tend to ignore this when they first get started. They just name things as they want to, and it usually is okay and it will work. The problem comes later on when they want to take their database to the next level and start integrating it with some other database to exchange data, or they want to hire someone from the outside world like a VB coder to come in and write some code for them to make some really nice macros, and either the designer or the software developer says, I don't want to work with you because you didn't follow good naming conventions, and it'll take too much for me to redo this work. So I want you to start looking at naming conventions right from the beginning. Now, at the same time, I need to let you know in our book, the first 4 chapters, the author did not follow good naming conventions. And then in the last chapters that we deal, chapter 5 on, we will see that author did really good naming. So let's talk about naming conventions. First, we're talking about the naming of objects, meaning tables, queries, forms, reports, things like that, and we're talking about field names. So one of the first things that we want to do is we don't want spaces in our names. Spaces can cause a real big problem later on for the VB coders because spaces mean something to them. Access supports spaces, but a good database designer will not use them. So if you're going to put an underscore in there, that's okay. A lot of people will not even put a space or an underscore in there, and we can see this on this particular database down here. We have the name, last space, no space name, and first no space name, birth, no space date. These are great examples of not even putting in a space. We don't need that. So the other thing that you'll notice is that we've begun each word with a capital letter. So those are key things to notice here. So you see it's a capital L for last, capital N for first name, same with first name, same with email address down here. So we're capitalizing those key words, and it makes it easier for us later on to read. It makes people who come in later on to understand more what you're trying to do. We try to stay away from special characters. You can put a hyphen in there, you can put an underscore. There's certain characters that you can absolutely not use, like a period or a slash. Now, what we do in the naming is, and we've seen this already, we put TBL in lowercase in front of the name of the object. We put QRY for a query in front of the name of the object. And the reason we do this is not so much for Access here, because in Access we can clearly see that this falls under an area called tables. That's a table. But we could have a query called patient, we could have a table called patient, a form called patient, and for us in Access it's not a big problem because we have these little things. Most other databases, as a matter of fact, I don't know of any other databases that actually group your objects like this. So in that case, you need to identify those objects, or else you'll be looking at 4 things called patient. One is a table, one is a query, one is a form, and one is a report, and you're not sure which one is which. So that's why these tags make it really easy. We'll see that that's not being done in the first 4 chapters. It is being done in the last. And then we can tag our data types. Now this book has chosen not to do that, but what you would find is in the field name you would tag that BIN if it was a binary field. If it was currency, you'd put a CUR in there, or a great example right here is date and time, DTM. Now what you're going to see here when we look at this table here, they are not putting in here DTM birth date, which really should be in there. Now in this book they've chosen not to do that, and we're not going to do that this semester, but I think it's very important for us to understand that good database design, you really would want to put that in there, especially if you're going to go work with a VB coder later on in life. They like these and it makes great sense to them. Now, MEM used to stand for the old memo field. Now, long text is what's there now, but we still want to remember it used to be called memo, and a text was a text field, not short text, so we called that STR, and that stood for string. This was a string of information that was coming. We really just talked about naming conventions here. We learned that we can break the rules, not follow them, and maybe get away with it. We also learned that later on in life, if we try to get with other database designers to exchange information, or we try to hire a software developer to maybe come in and do some coding for us, we might have some major difficulties. So we learned that we should follow good naming conventions. We learned that naming goes to both objects and fields. And we learned that the authors of our book didn't follow this, unfortunately. The first 4 chapters, the author did not follow naming conventions. And we will see that change when we hit chapter 5 and go totally to naming conventions. I am going to be asking us to do naming conventions, especially after we pass the chapter 5. Your final project should have all the proper naming conventions, and if it doesn't, it could hurt your final grade.